Welcome to the Dibley diaries for this week. This week we've got quite a difficult passage from Luke for the Gospel reading, which talks about there's going to be conflict and that there's going to be difficult times, that Jesus hasn't come to bring peace. It's quite a difficult passage. We're going to explore it a bit more in thought for the week. With regard to the rural challenge, I've been thinking about adversity and how adversity in a community can bring about change for the good, as well as be a real challenge for people. And I just think I've seen church communities and village communities respond to tragedy in a way where the community has come out stronger at the end of it. And I wonder if you have experience of that. Maybe someone has tragically died, maybe there's been a particular situation where something has gone very wrong, where people have felt that they needed to pull together. I'm not sure how our experience of COVID fits into this yet. I don't think anyone really even knows, even though it's kind of 5 years from more than 5 years from the start, but I don't think anyone really knows how long it is from the end of that. Interesting to see how different churches responded in that adversity. But I often think, actually, if we had this big adversity, we would rise up to it. But how can we encourage ourselves to be transformed and to be encouraged and to be driven to action in ordinary situations, in ordinary times where maybe there doesn't feel to be adversity? Now, how we feel about our current times will probably depend on all sorts of things about our own character and how we feel as a church. But actually, if we do feel that we are currently in a position of conflict and of adversity, how could we be responding to that as individuals and church community in a way which is bringing about good, which is bringing out good from that adversity? Thought for the week this week is based on two passages. This week we're going to be looking at the Gospel passage, but also thinking a bit about the passage in Hebrews, which is paired to go with it. So the Luke Gospel passage is really quite a difficult one for this week, where Jesus is talking about how he's come and there's going to be not peace but conflict, and conflict between families, conflict within families. There's going to be all sorts of terrible things which happen. So Jesus talks about that, and I usually say about that actually that we know that Jesus acknowledges that our lives are not going to be easy when we're Christians, that it's not going to be a really simple thing for us to be a Christian, to follow his teaching. It will bring division and conflict, and that feels quite a difficult thing at the moment. There's all sorts of issues. We probably have one on our hearts at the moment, or more than one, of places where there's terrible conflict in the world. And so when Jesus speaks and says, "I haven't come to bring peace," that seems a really harsh thing for us, especially when we think about all the prophecies in Isaiah about the Messiah bringing peace. But Jesus is saying, actually, there's going to be a lot of conflict and there's going to be a lot of anxiety. And that's matched with the Hebrews passage, where it talks all about heroes of the faith, people who have had faith and have undergone great conflicts. They've been through terrible things, and it talks all about those heroes. If you have a chance to look at that passage, I'll put the reference to it in the episode notes. And it's just a good thing to think about, actually, that lots and lots of other people have lived through difficult and dangerous and awful times before. When I was training for ordination, we had a whole weekend devoted to church history, and you think, well, that could have been really dry, a whole list of dates and popes and divisions and more divisions and what was happening and difficult times. But the lecturer was fantastic, and she took us through some key times in church history where it appeared to be that people thought that the church was going to die. People were anxious that the church was going to die, and yet it lived. God had a different plan. God had something else that he was doing and that he was going to do. And sometimes it's hard for us when we can't see that plan, when we don't know what God is going to do next, and we're very anxious about it. And those church history lectures, I think back on them sometimes, of things that have been difficult before, and when people thought that this might be it, this might be the end, for the church community, for the nation, for peace, for the end of the world. People had worked through that and lived through that, and that's what we see in the Hebrews. All these people have lived and worked through difficult times as well. So that's kind of really what I wanted to think about today, this balance that we have, that we're holding together this terrible conflict in our lives, in the world, the fact that there isn't peace where we need peace. And then the other bit that we're holding together is to do with the fact that people of faith have lived through difficult times like this before, and they've been awful times, really awful times, and people have lived through them. As a little side note, I also spent some time this week thinking about conflict within the church, how difficult that is, how awful that is, and how that can make us feel really downhearted about the future of the church and what's happening and what's going to happen. And I've just been thinking a bit this week about me. I was at a church meeting where there was going to be a lot of anxiety and conflict. It was a debate, it was all timed, people were being given times, and people with very different opinions were going to speak on it. And the person who led that debate, or who did the opening prayers for that debate, prayed at the beginning something along the lines of, may our words be soft and sweet, because the chances are we will have to eat them anyway. Which I don't think is original, but I haven't been able to find something sensible on Google to attribute it to. But actually, Jesus knew there was going to be conflict. And in any situation where there's conflict and we're anxious, we need to think about what our role is in that conflict. What is our part in conflict and conflict resolution, and not to lose hope, because we have all these people through the ages who have lived faithfully even through the most difficult times. And with Jesus, and with that, holding the sure and certain hope of the death and resurrection and ascension of Jesus, we know that actually suffering will not be the final outcome. The Dibley moment of the week. This week is of a time when I didn't pray the may your words be soft and sweet prayer before a meeting. I was in a PCC meeting which I was chairing, and actually a couple of the people there were actually just shamelessly shouting at each other across the table, just having a real proper row. We were sitting at a table. I think I had a really bad cold. I wasn't feeling great, and I just banged both my hands down on the table and just went, "Be quiet." And yes, I'm not sure that I can imagine Geraldine in the Vicar of Dibley doing that, but there was, I'm pleased to say, only one occasion where I had to do that in a PCC meeting where I needed people to stop shouting at each other, and because we were just not listening to what we were saying. Well, that's it for the Dibley Diaries for this week. I pray that you and your village, however large or small, have a really blessed week where you can have a week of peace and supporting each other against adversity.